Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Warcraft comes to the big screen, but can it conquer the cinema? With their world of Draenor dying, the Orcs, led by Daniel Wu's Gul'dan, move through a portal into the world of Azeroth, which they try to take for their own. When they hear of this, humans in the Kingdom of Stormwind, led by Dominic Cooper's King Lane and Travis Fimmell's Lothar, must try to save their world. With the help of Ben Foster's Medivh, the Guardian, and Ben Schnetzer's young mage Khadgar, as well as half-orc Garona, played by Paula Patton, who they have captured. Meanwhile, Orc Chief Durotan, played by Toby Kebbell, does not trust Gul'dan and sets out to try and usurp him before he destroys his race and Azeroth like he has their home. Warcraft's hugely successful video game franchise has been running well over 20 years now and has spun off into countless other media, including novels, manga, comic books. It's not a surprise that they made a film out of it, and when it comes to breaking the video game curse, Warcraft has as much chance as anything, especially given the rich and dense mythology of the series. Although, to be honest, my hopes for Warcraft breaking this curse is not because I'm a fan of the games, because I have to admit I've not played them. I came into this movie fresh. What I was hoping this would succeed is because Duncan Jones is directing it, the son of David Bowie, and I am a big fan of his previous films, Moon and Source Code, which are very self-contained, very intelligent movies that are almost like bottle episodes, if you will. And Warcraft is very much the opposite of those movies. It's this big blockbuster filmmaking. Warcraft's biggest pleasures come visually. You can tell that Jones has spent a lot of time and effort translating the look of the games to the screen, and especially when it comes to the effects work. There is a mountain of special effects in this movie. Warcraft spent 20 months in post-production just trying to deal with the huge amount of effects shots, and that time is not wasted here. When it comes to the digital backdrop, it is quite immersive in some respects, especially the establishing shots of the various worlds that we see. However, even the visual style is not entirely unique, and that's partially down to the source material. Warcraft the video game borrowed a lot from Tolkien, and you can see that debt in the movie, because whenever dwarves or elves are on the screen, pretty briefly as it turns out, it feels like a Hobbit sequel. The spirit of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit runs all the way through this thing. And while Jones has created this visual splendour, unfortunately, he doesn't create a story that makes us want to spend time in this world unless you're already a Warcraft fan. This has clearly been made with the eyes of a fan, and it's filled with fan service and references that people already familiar with the game will likely appreciate. You can tell that the divisive response to this movie is likely from people who have played the games versus people who are not as familiar with them. And I think the people that will enjoy this movie most are the ones that already know Warcraft quite well. However, speaking from my experience as someone who is totally unfamiliar with it, Warcraft is in this very, very weird place when it comes to its storytelling, because the world building is murky to the point of incomprehensible, but the narrative it tells is very predictable. And I will try and put that across. When it comes to immersing the audience into this world and getting them to try and understand its logic and rules, Jones stumbles right out of the gate. This movie is absolutely loaded with clunky exposition and dialogue, trying to get in all this mythology and lore. This film is very ambitious. They are really trying to cram in a lot here, but it always feels very forced and never feels very natural. It feels especially erratic in its opening stages where it's trying to set up all the characters, and it isn't helped by the film's editing. This seems to be the year of big tentpole movies that have apparently lost how to edit themselves. You can tell that Warcraft has had 30 minutes cut out of it, despite running just over 2 hours. There are scenes that look like they've been cut in the middle, there are scenes that start at very weird points, and there are awkward transitions and cuts. It's all over the place. It really is. And what effectively cripples the movie is that it happens right from the outset. After the pre-title sequence, It's like someone has sat on a chapter skip button because we're suddenly thrown into the movie and it doesn't even bother to introduce its main character. It's weird, there is no character introduction for Lothar, which effectively hinders him as a character, but also it feels like we're missing something. And throughout the movie, it always feels like we're missing something, because the dialogue is so jargon heavy and so heavy in high fantasy that it never engages the audience properly. It always feels like we're being held at a distance away from the material. The movie just doesn't give you a reason to care about what's happening. You find yourself losing patience and interest in it very quickly, and you don't really find yourself invested in the plot. I think Jones has confused commitment to the source material with taking it seriously, because this has a very, very draggy, portentous tone, especially when it comes to the dialogue scenes. My goodness, is this a talky movie. There are so many scenes of characters talking to each other. It feels like it's weighed down in the minutiae and politics of its world. There isn't really that much to enjoy about it. For a movie called Warcraft, for example, it's surprisingly light on action up until the final reel, apart from two major set-piece exceptions. And so we get a lot of people talking about things that don't really interest us and don't entirely make a lot of sense. You've got characters whose motivations are murky at best and disappear and reappear at random intervals. I think a lot of this movie's problems come down to the fact that the human characters are way less engaging than the orcs. The human characters and their scenes are very boring in the way they're written, and their performances are not very good. Travis Fimmel, for example, as Lothar, he seems to be caught between trying to be this charismatic, wisecracking hero and having to handle the dramatic material with his son, and it results in these weird, awkward moments with his character, especially later on when he's playing drunk, and it feels like he's playing wildly over the top and campy in what should be quite an emotional scene. And he's hampered by the fact that his character's backstory seems to have been left on the cutting room floor. He just feels like a stock fantasy hero. Dominic Cooper's King is another character that doesn't feel entirely fleshed out at all. He just seems to be there. And Ruth Nager, his Preacher co-star, she gets a nice little moment of humanity when she engages with Paula Patton for the first time. But unfortunately, she's only in this movie for 5 minutes and has such a tiny role to be almost inconsequential. I think the human cast member that best encapsulates the problems with this movie is Ben Foster's Medivh, who is supposed to be the all-powerful guardian wizard of Azeroth, and he really could have had a lot of fun in this role if he really wanted to, and how grandiose and theatrical it is. And instead, Foster presents us with this very dour, angst-ridden performance that sucks the energy out of the room every time he appears on screen. There's no sense of presence to him, and it's like the movie itself trying way too hard for its own good to take itself seriously. Although when it comes to people being utterly miscast, Paula Patton gives him a run for his money when it comes to Garona, who is this very complicated character, and the movie struggles to try and put that across on the screen. She is this half-orc character who is rejected by her world, but also rejected by the humans. She's very much torn between them. She's the conflict in a personification, essentially. There is a real difficulty in taking that character seriously with the way they've designed her, because Patton has these little mini tusks that are basically fangs sticking out of her mouth the entire time, which make her look faintly ridiculous. But also, what they've done in post is that they've digitally painted her skin colour green rather than paint it. And what ends up happening is that looks really distracting, because, first of all, she looks like the green alien from Star Trek, which you spend the entire movie trying to get your mind over, but also, her skin colour never looks particularly consistent. It always seems to shift from scene to scene in terms of how green she actually is. And Patton can't really do anything under under this CGI and makeup work, she's bested by it, unfortunately. It's clear the movie wants to have her as this strong female character, but at the same time, it doesn't entirely commit to it, especially because the character spends so much of the movie being dragged around by either orcs or humans. By far the movie's most compelling scenes are easily those with the orcs, especially with Toby Kebbell's Durotan. The scenes, especially early on with his wife, they have real emotion to them, and they have real warmth, and they really communicate so much that the wordiness of the human scenes doesn't even come close. Where they've really expanded upon the motion capture is getting the rich detail in faces. Jones's camera lingers in on the orc characters' faces, and those scenes are legitimately effective. You care about the orcs way more than the humans. I wish the movie was about them, not the human characters. There is a caveat here. See, as good as CGI is these days, when it comes to having actors interact with humanoid CGI characters in the frame, they still haven't conquered the uncanny valley there. It feels like this movie would have been much better suited as just being entirely CGI, especially because of the amount of CGI work here. It basically is a CGI animated movie, apart from the live-action actors. But even though you can't tell the motion capture performers, their work is in every single frame. And the Orc world is so much more interesting because it has a sense of honour and loyalty and code about it. Especially between Durotan and Orgrim, who may not agree with Durotan that they have to side with the humans, but also feels that Gul'dan is a threat and a danger to their kind. Although that side works successfully, it's undermined by the characterisation of Daniel Wu's Gul'dan, because Gul'dan is such a transparent, stock kind of villain. He looks like a warlock, and he's so obviously shifty and evil. This is a guy that sucks souls out of his prisoners to feed himself, and for some reason it takes most of the movie for them to realise that maybe this character might be a little bit sinister and might have been the one that destroyed his world with his lust for power. He's such an over-the-top villain that it kind of undermines some of the rich characterisation on the orc side. And unfortunately, while I was watching it, what I was most reminded of was the fantasy plots from both the 80s and of the noughties, when everyone was trying to cash in on Lord of the Rings. This feels like it could have come out in either period. It very much has the vibe of things like Krull and Dune about it. And when Legendary and Universal greenlit this franchise, and they so want a franchise here, you can tell what they wanted was Avatar meets Lord of the Rings. What they've got is Aragorn meets John Carter. And I know a lot of people have got very defensive about some of the early reviews that were quite negative, but you have to understand that this movie has to connect with general audiences, and the movie fails at that. It's not enough to simply appeal to the fans, especially when this movie has $160 million riding on it. The movie only gets especially bad in its very late stages, when it really starts baiting itself for a sequel. There are a lot of very haphazard, very ill-advised plot turns here that happen with almost no justification whatsoever, and they're clearly being engineered for a follow-up, but it leaves this movie on such an unsatisfying note. It does that thing that a lot of fantasy movies do, and especially a lot of fantasy movies that don't make it past the first one, where they leave so many threads hanging that you can't enjoy it on a standalone level. The movie, ironically enough, is actually subtitled The Beginning in the UK, not on the actual film itself, but on the posters, and that feels really, really optimistic. I would feel very surprised if this movie managed to earn a sequel. Oh, and on one final note, don't see this movie in 3D like I did. It makes it look incredibly murky and washed out. This has all the hallmarks of a bad conversion job. There is next to no 3D effect in it whatsoever. It makes the movie look way worse than it actually is. I actually took off my glasses at several points and watched the movie out of focus because it was so much more preferable to watching it with the dark glasses on. This is easily one of the worst 3D jobs I've seen since the likes of Priest and Clash of the Titans. really, really terrible stuff. Warcraft is what happens when talented people work hard on something that refuses to come to life despite their best efforts. On a visual level, the film has wonderful production design that transfers the game to the screen to the point of sensory overload, and the CGI work is top notch. Unfortunately, everything past that is a mess. Its world building will be baffling to newcomers, especially thanks to clumsy editing that leaves chunks missing, but the story it tells is deeply predictable, particularly on the human side, who are far less interesting than their orc counterparts. There's no doubting Duncan Jones' commitment to his source material, but the film is leaden and dull, full of talky, exposition-heavy scenes that rob the movie of a sense of fun. Fans of the series might get more out of it, but it's unlikely general audiences will make this become a successful franchise. Coming up soon, Ewan McGregor and Stellan Skarsgård in John le Carre's Our Kind of Traitor, Kelsey Grammer goes from riches to rags in Breaking the Bank, and we find out the secret life of pets. But until then, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.